This is the very first of our Pro 15 Plain Talk Zoom meetings that we're going to have. And we have as our guest today, Dan Haley with Colorado Oil and Gas Association. And oil and gas is a big part of our region out here. And a lot of things are going on, not only because of COVID-19, but Saudi Arabia, Russia, a whole bunch of other players in the picture. So Dan, why don't you start out just telling us a little bit about your organization and you, for anybody. I notice there's several people on here I don't know, so I'm assuming that not everybody knows you also.
Okay, sounds good. Well, thank you so much for having me on this morning. My name is Dan Haley. I'm with the Colorado Oil and Gas Association. We are a statewide trade association that represents about 300 members who all represent the entire value chain of oil and natural gas in Colorado. So we've got upstream, big producers, small producers, those midstream companies that carry that product down the line. Anybody who is impacted in the oil and natural gas industry can be a member of COGA. Our job is to represent industry in public relations matters, regulatory matters, legislative matters. I always like to kind of shorthand it to say if we're doing our job, then hopefully our members can do their jobs here in Colorado.
Great. Well, let's just get started with one of the big issues that I know Pro 15 has been working on, as well as you guys. The Air Quality Control Commission has continued to meet during our stay-at-home period. And can you kind of bring us up to date on what they're doing, what the drawbacks are for us in Colorado, and especially in Northeast Colorado, and what can we actually do?
Sure. Great question. The Air Quality Control Commission, as you said, does continue to meet. They've actually set a pretty aggressive timeline and schedule. Even though the rest of the world seems to be on pause right now, they continue to push forward various different things. They have what's called the Reg 22 greenhouse gas rulemaking, which is scheduled for May 21st. They have engine and emission monitoring pre-production tank controls rulemaking, which is going to be noticed sometime in June. They've been ramping up inspections and enforcement out in the field. They've got a different interpretation of some rules that they passed in December from how we were interpreting those rules that they're trying to implement right now. And then last week, Will Tour, the director of the governor's energy office, and John Putnam with CDPHE unveiled what they're calling their greenhouse gas roadmap to comply with House Bill 1261. And House Bill 1261 was passed by the legislature in 2019. It's designed to reduce greenhouse gas pollution by 50% by 2030, 90% by 2050, and that's 90% from 2005 levels. So part of this is then establishing that sort of baseline levels from 2005 that they're going to try to do, and then really assess where other air bills that have been passed and how those impact this bill and kind of how they're going to work through that issue. So there was a lot of testimony. It was a Zoom call last week. You heard really loudly the voices of governments on the western slope in the Piceance Basin saying, slow down, don't do this right now. Garfield County Commissioner Tom Jankowski said, and I'm just going to read this quote here because I thought it was pretty prescient. When making rules for the entire state, you need to look at the science and data behind your rules. One size does not fit all, and we on the western slope are not negatively impacting air quality in the Front Range attainment area. So they continue to push that forward. During the meeting last week, they did admit that their models that their consultant put together didn't look at the economic impacts of the COVID pandemic. And so I think even before that, that proposal was a bit unrealistic and certainly not economically feasible. So it's one of the things that we've been concerned about. I know governments and folks on the western slope have been concerned about. And if you all are hoping to take part in this, we would certainly welcome that, and probably calls, emails to the COGCC, CDPHE, really asking for a more reasonable approach to be taken through this process, and to acknowledge that the world has changed greatly in the last month, and many of the things that we are doing have been changed by this stay-at-home order and needing to be at home versus in offices, and certainly the need to sort of slow some of this down. We also have some concerns with just doing these rulemakings virtually rather than doing them in person. Many of the things that they're looking at trying to do, I don't see them having immediate impacts in terms of reducing emissions, things like that, and can certainly be delayed over a few weeks to months. A lot. That's a long answer there. I apologize, but there's just a lot happening from that division of government right now.
Well, and I saw another one come out this morning from Natural Resources about converting all of the state vehicles to electric. But I also, and I can't even remember what program it was on, but there was a lot about, since we've all been staying at home, how much the pollution has virtually disappeared in some of these countries, and everybody in Denver's talking about cleaner air. We know out here we've always had the clean air. So there's something between oil and gas and numbers or whatever, but I'm seeing a push even at the federal level for more money as money's invested into the economy to go to green energy. What are you seeing?
Yeah, we're certainly seeing that too. It's interesting when you have a crisis like this, you'll see people try to play that out to meet their end goals or what they're trying to do as an organization, and we'll certainly see a lot of that. So the air has been beautiful. I live on the west side of town. I can look into downtown, and it as the brown cloud is gone, and that's because we're all staying home. Oil and gas continues. Our workers are out in the field continuing to produce oil and gas. So it'll be really interesting to look at those air data numbers over time to see what is the true impact here. And what you're seeing across the world is people are the impact. But do we want to live in a world where we're stuck in our houses all day long and we don't have access to the things that we need to have access to? So what we have to do is continue to push this idea of human ingenuity, American ingenuity. Let's find ways to do this cleaner, better, and safer. Let's develop energy in ways that help the environment, but then allow us to live the lives that we want to live. So you'll see a push. There already, I would say, if there wasn't a Republican Senate and a Republican president, you probably would have seen some sort of Green New Deal push through the Congress already at this point. The way I look at this personally, when you come out of a downturn like this, you need all forms of energy. You need abundant, efficient, and affordable energy to pull yourself out of a downturn as the economy begins to get going again. To me, that's oil and gas. If wind and solar are there too, and they want to come along and they're going to be able to provide the energy that we need, then let's do that too. I think we need to look at all energy sources as we begin to pull out of this. In terms of electric vehicles, I think you'll see more of the subsidies happening for electric vehicles, but you have to look at where are those electric vehicles coming from? How are we making the batteries? What is the impact to the environment on those batteries? What are we plugging them into? Are we plugging them into coal plants, into natural gas plants? Let's just talk about some of those trade-offs. There is a new documentary that was produced by Michael Moore that premiered on Earth Day called Planet of the Humans, which I would encourage you all to take a look at. I'm not telling you that I agree with the overall sentiment of this piece. It's anti-capitalism, it's anti-corporate, it's anti-fossil fuels, but they look at the impacts from renewable energy to the environment. A lot of renewable energy is burning wood for power, which is not good for the environment. So it's really interesting to see. It explains things in ways that you don't often hear. We've talked about it. We understand that when you're building electric vehicles, that those batteries have to come from someplace, and that's rare earth mining and different things that are damaging to the environment. But it was interesting to see it in a Michael Moore documentary.
And I had heard him on TV the other night. I haven't had a chance to watch it, so that'll be
that's on YouTube
list to look at. Yeah. So we all know that oil prices, price for a barrel of oil just dropped through the basement this time, and we've always had fluctuations in prices. But what's different about this time?
Okay. A couple different things are happening. I think you mentioned it at the beginning. You already had an oversupplied market. The world was producing about 100 million barrels of oil a day. The world needed about 98 million barrels a day. So you already had lower prices because the market was a little bit oversupplied. And then you have coronavirus coming in and economies effectively shutting down. I filled up my Forerunner yesterday for the first time since early March, so 6-7 weeks. And so you have people not driving, not flying, big companies shutting down, not using energy. So the demand went down to about 75 million barrels a day. So you've got an oversupplied market, demand going down because of coronavirus, and then Russia and Saudi Arabia use this as an opportunity to dump oil onto the market, to put even more supply out there in hopes of breaking the back of the American shale revolution. That drove prices down probably the second week of March, early March, March 10th, I think, somewhere around that time frame, drove it down into the 20s. And it kind of sat there for a little while. And then what you saw happen early this week was what are called May contracts. They have 2 days before the May contracts expired. That's where you're trading that at a certain dollar. And there wasn't enough storage. And so we kind of knew storage was going to be an issue. We just didn't know how, I didn't know how it was going to play out. And so this is an idea of oversupplied market, demand being down. We continue to produce. There's no place to put that oil you're producing. The storage system starts to fill up. And so you saw that price drop below zero, which I didn't even know was possible until this week, and watch that happen. And then when those May contracts expired and we got to June, that price has since come up, but it's only $17. The WTI, which is the domestic, where the domestic price trades, is called WTI. That's about $17 this morning. It was $23 last week, and was, in the 50s and 60s in the early part of this year. That is probably, from a trade association standpoint, I always look at oil in that $55 to $65 range. It's kind of a sweet spot in that our companies are able to make money, keep people employed, pay taxes, do good things for the economy, yet it's also low enough that consumers benefit from that. We don't pay a ton for gasoline or to heat our homes, our businesses. And so we just saw that price crater completely this week. We need to get that up a little more. I think as you begin to see, the first thing is getting control of coronavirus and what that looks like and the health issues there. And then as the economy begins to open back up a little bit, our hope is you'll see that demand begin to rise. The other thing I'll point out, as you have storage issues and pricing being so low, you're going to see a lot of wells being shut in Colorado. I don't know how many at this time, but you'll see wells being shut in, which means that production is essentially stopping, which will then, the supply comes down, hopefully demand goes up, and you'll see that price come up a little bit, but no one's expecting it to go very high for the foreseeable future.
Now, how would someone explain the difference between the price at the pump and the price per barrel of oil, which is usually, well, if oil's trading at, minus a penny, why am I still paying $2 a gallon for gas?
Right. So I'm not an expert on this, but there are two things I think I can tell you with some certainty. I talked about WTI, West Texas Intermediate. That's the price domestic oil is traded at. There's something called the Brent price of crude, which is typically $5 or $6 higher. That's the international price of crude. Gasoline prices are based on Brent, and that is because over the last 40 years, when we've built refineries in this country, we have built them to refine a different type of crude, to refine foreign oil, essentially, because we weren't producing as much when we were building these refineries. Now we're producing a lot of oil in this country, but we haven't built a refinery in 40 years in this country. And so our refineries are sort of fitted to that. So when we talk about energy security, we're always going to need a certain amount of oil coming in that supplies gasoline and different things. So it's based on that Brent price. And then you have an assortment of taxes that are put on top of it as well. I know, as I said, I filled up yesterday, and the price for 85 octane was $1.29 at the station by my house. I had a discount of 90 cents for my King Soopers card, so I actually paid 39 cents a gallon for gas, filled up my Forerunner for $7.
I filled mine up too quickly.
Well, we also have been eating at home, so our King Soopers points have piled up, and we haven't gone anywhere, so they kept adding up to where I had 90 cents that I was able to use. But I couldn't believe 39 cents. I started driving in 1985, 86, and I think it was around $1 at that time. So it's unlike anything I've ever seen before. So you'll probably see those prices coming down at the pump. I don't know exactly how all those things happen, but you always kind of forget that there's a huge chunk of taxes on those as well that you're always going to be paying.
Okay, well, one final question, and then we'll take some questions from the group. Has the workers in the field, in the ancillary services, have they contracted COVID? Has that part of this process greatly affected the health and well-being of the actual workers in the field?
So I can tell you that the government early on declared an executive order that oil and gas was critical infrastructure and the employees were considered essential employees, which was very good news for us. So we could continue for safety reasons to be out in the field working on facilities, but also continuing to do whatever production work needs to be done, depending on whether the permit you have or if you can drill with, the prices being where they are. So we continue to have workers out in the field. They're employing social distancing as best as possible out in the field. Last week, the governor asked all of those employees to wear masks. And so there are companies producing FR, flame retardant masks to wear out in the field. They're really doing a great job of taking this very seriously and taking safety seriously. I'm always, I don't want to say amazed, but every time I'm out on a site or a facility, safety is just a paramount concern to this industry, and they really do everything they can to be safe and to keep their employees safe. And they've been doing that as well throughout this process. People who don't work out in the field have been staying home, working from home. Things have seemed to have been going well. I don't know of any coronavirus infections out in the field, but because we are considered essential employees and critical infrastructure, we're considered, I believe, tier 2 in the state's plans for testing. So if there is any issue out in the field, those employees can go to their personal doctors and hopefully have a higher priority for testing, so you can limit any sort of outbreaks or exposures out in the fields. But I have not heard of anything that's happened out that's been widespread or anything at this point. Doesn't mean it's not happening. I just don't know of it, but I don't believe we've had any interruptions because of coronavirus.
And I'm just assuming here, but if it was out there, it would be covered. So I'm, unless it's a case of being asymptomatic or something like that.
Right. Yeah.
We had we have all these old people over here on the chat room talking about how low the gas prices were. I can probably beat all of them, but I'm not going to go there. But from Barry Gore, who is from Adams County, how will current oil prices help the airlines with jet fuel futures? And will the lack of storage keep prices higher?
That's a good question. I don't know exactly how that will impact jet fuel. I assume all of those fuels will come down. A lot of what's produced in Colorado ends up at Suncor, which does become jet fuel that's used out at DIA. It's interesting. I have often out in public, the activists will say, well, you don't even use this oil and gas. It all goes someplace else. Well, one, it's okay that it's going someplace else. We live in a global marketplace. We want people to use our product around the world. But two, a lot of it does stay here. A lot of the oil produced will end up at Suncor, becomes jet fuel, also becomes asphalt on the western slope to pave roads. And so we do use this product here in Colorado, and it's intricately linked. I don't know. I assume those prices will stay low there. And I think storage issues are going to make it lower actually versus higher.
Okay. Do the oil and gas regs make it more expensive to produce here versus Texas or other states? The other one comes to mind is Wyoming.
Yeah, I think anytime you pass a regulation, there's a chance that it's going to add dollars at the wellhead and increase the cost of doing business in Colorado. There are some people who have put an actual figure on it and say that for a barrel of oil is $5 or $6 discount because of or in addition to, I guess, based on it coming out of Colorado because of all the extra regulations that here. So we need prices to be a little higher in Colorado to make it make sense to continue to drill here, because there are additional dollars put on it. I don't know that I've ever seen one official in terms of the extra dollars that it costs to drill in Colorado because of those regulations. But that's one of the concerns we have now with everything that's coming down the pike, is will that raise the costs of doing business here? The legislature also still has a couple bills alive where they're looking to increase fees on oil and gas companies. And fees are a nice way of getting around Tabor and taxes. And that's a huge concern coming into this new legislative session at a time when the economy is struggling. It's probably not the best time to be attaching fees to what we're trying to do in oil and gas. So there is an issue in terms of working in Colorado. Again, as I say all of that, this is a beautiful state, and we all care about the environment here. And so our operators, when you're going to work in Colorado, that you need to meet a high standard, and they do meet that high standard. And that's coming with all these extra regulations, and when those costs go up, making sure that we're continuing to comply with those regulations to protect the environment. I would argue, and I think would be great to get data points around this, that we're producing some of the cleanest molecules in the world in Colorado because of all those extra regulations and because of the technology and innovation that our companies are employing out in the field. And I think that's an important message to get out, is we're going to move forward as a society that if you're going to burn oil and gas, which we all know the economy and the world needs for the foreseeable future, you want those resources coming out of Colorado, where we're doing it cleaner and better than any place else.
Okay, last question here, Dan. What are the top 3 challenges that your operators are telling you they're currently facing as a result of COVID-19?
I think one of the big issues right now is just cash flow and keeping sort of liquidity on the balance sheets as long as possible. There have been some movements to extend taxes out, and so you pay your property taxes at a later rate. That's been important for our folks to be able to keep cash on their ledgers, on their balance sheets for as long as possible. And then obviously demand is a huge issue. And then the continual regulatory environment that we're facing in Colorado, and having to do all of this at a time when it's, we've got all these, competing priorities, and understanding that we need to continue to work through these rulemakings continues to be an issue, I think, for our operators.
And by the way, that came from Aaron. I apologize, Aaron. So we just have about 2 or 3 minutes left on this particular broadcast. Is there anything, Dan, that you would like our members, our Northeast region, or anybody else that listens to this program to know about what's going on in your industry?
Well, I think one of the important things to know is that we will survive this. We will get through. This industry is resilient. It has been through very dynamic commodity pricing environments in the past, but it's going to be a while, and it's going to take everybody kind of pulling together. I think that we're blessed in this state to have an abundance of resources, whether that's wind and solar, but certainly all the resources beneath our feet, oil and natural gas, and we need to harvest all of those to kind of help pull us through this. But I think the long-term fundamentals are still true, and that is, over time, if you look ahead into 2050, the world will continue to see an increase in demand, not just need oil and gas, but demand is expected to go up through 2050. And so we need to be working on producing that here in Colorado, cleaner, better, and safer than anywhere. And we will get through this, and it is going to be tough, but this is an essential industry. It's important to our state, to good jobs, to the tax base, to working families across the state. In the Eastern Plains, make your voices heard. When you're seeing policies that are coming out that are not helpful at this time, the way I look at what's happening right now, the biggest thing state and local governments can do is do no harm. And then get back to economic development fundamentals. How can we help? What is helpful for your business right now? Ask those questions. Don't pile on regulations that are not going to have any sort of important impact at this time. And I think the voices of rural Colorado, of the Eastern Plains, are more important than ever before, that people understand what's happening in Denver is not the same thing that's happening elsewhere in the state. And Kathy, you know this, when we're over at the State House testifying, they think there's this little bubble around the metro area and that the rest of the state often doesn't exist. And so it's important that they hear those voices and know that there are real people out there with real concerns about jobs, wages, tax base, all of those things.
Well, thank you very much, Dan. I appreciate you spending some time with us because I know you have a lot of calls on your time. Thank everybody on the phone call for participating in our first Zoom Plain Talk with Dan Haley. And next Friday on May 1st, we will be doing Plain Talk with community colleges. So watch for the link to come out, and everybody have a great weekend.